Welcome to the Joe Moglia Podcast, featuring Hall of Fame football coach and world-renowned business leader, Joe Moglia. Let's join the host of the Joe Moglia Podcast, Jamie King.
Welcome back to the Joe Moglia Podcast. Without further ado, it is Joe time.
Hello, Jamie. Hope you're doing well.
I am. I tell you what, we don't have a lack of news. Of course, we saw the White House Correspondents Dinner. A shooting, political violence is on the rise. I think it goes without saying that Trump was probably one of the most polarizing figures in American political history. I think that goes without saying. But the violence and people say, well, it's all him, it's all him. Is it all him? I know he's a contributing factor, but so many people are talking about, and we've talked so many times on your show, the level of angst between parties, Democrat, Republican, Independent. I mean, so many people just at odds, not only against Trump, but against things that are happening in each party. What's your take on this entire mess that happened at the White House dinner and the entire violence that is between the parties?
Yeah, well, I think three things. One, I think Trump could have done a better job this time around from the very, very beginning, bringing the country together. He did not do a great job of that. But we've had violence, from a political perspective, like going back forever and ever. And, John F. Kennedy, Abraham Lincoln, Reagan, I think, was shot. Other people have been shot at. The Trumps have been shot at before. And there are always people, I think, that wind up going too far and take the law into their own hands. And I don't care what their rationale is. We're not put on this earth to be able to take advantage of other people or to be able to take somebody else's life. So no matter how you cut that, that's wrong, period. So that could be something really seriously wrong with an individual, have some sort of mental issues or diseases or whatever it might be. But whatever the reasons are, that's not acceptable. And then we talked about this before, that, I would feel a lot better if the parties came together to try to do the right thing for our country. And instead, they are obsessed with preventing the other party from getting elected or from reelected. And I'd like to see us to be able to do a better job of coming together that. But it's going to take a unique type of leader to be able to help us with that, and it's going to take time. That's not going to happen, I think, with the current administration. So we'll see what happens ultimately down the road.
I was going to ask you as another side note away from this question, but on the being attacked, now, Trump, that's a different level, but you and I, to a lesser degree, when you're a head coach, and you had so much success, Hall of Fame 20 times over. I mean, you've been the best of the best. But when you had a lean time or a bad time, and they called you names and said things from the stands, and they're paying their tickets, and they feel like they have the right to say so, how did you deal with the times that when it all wasn't the wine and roses that we all hope it is, when you had the down times?
I think you need to recognize in our country, there is such an incredible, passionate fan base for sports in general, and certainly, especially football, whether that could be a local community, a high school, a major college, the NFL, whatever it might be. People get a little bit carried away. And but with regard to football, a lot of people think that they automatically, they would know what to call. They would know the right thing. So when somebody else makes a mistake, it's easy for them to criticize after the fact. So I've known that all my life. And I recognize people are going to do that. And I try not to let that bother me. So I've got two quick stories. One is when I first became a head coach in high school in Delaware at Archbury Academy. It took us a little while to turn the program around, but we did. And my last year there, we were one of the better teams in the country. We lost one game to the state champion by a point. And it was a great season for us. I remember the game we lost. Coming home, and Kathy, my wife at the time, was really upset. And she said, the people in the stands were complaining about a call that I had made and that I was the reason why we lost the game. And what happened, we were moving the ball well on the ground. We were behind by a point, and, the time started to run out. So we faked the run, and we threw a deep pass to our wide receiver who was open and dropped the ball. Well, had we caught that, we would have won the game. He dropped it. We wound up running out of time. We didn't win the game. And so I said, the reality is, I did make the call, so it is on me, but
Right.
it's also on me, I think, for all the good things that we've done as well. And you can't be afraid to make a call because you're going to be criticized. And I think too often that's where courage and guts come in. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know what the odds are. You have to know the probability. You have to know it's something you can execute. But at the end of the day, you're not always going to be right, and you can fail for whatever reasons are. That's one. So that's something you just have to understand and accept. And I think when I came here to Coastal the first time around, how my predecessor was released was not handled in the right way.
Right.
And people didn't know who I was. People didn't do their homework on me. And it was like, who is this guy? And I was really disliked. And I think
You told me it wasn't an easy entrance there.
No, it was a tough entrance. My first 6 months, I remember getting 4 traffic tickets. 2 were going 42 and a 35, and most of them were around campus. And but at the end of the day, though, we wound up winning. Our players started to do well, and people started to respect the fact that we were doing a good job. Yeah. But it took me, I had to prove myself, but I wasn't welcome to begin with. But that's something you need to understand. And I remember never looking at a blog, never reading anything about me. I'm not looking at the paper. So things like that didn't bother me. And my son, Kevin, who read all that stuff, said, Dad, I know you don't want to pay attention to this, but I got to get this one off my chest. And somebody had written a blog about how the president at the time, Dave DeCenzo, should be fired because you let go of coaching icon. That's a bit of a stretch. Yeah. And he brought in this Wall Street reject who couldn't find a job. So I go, well, wow, that's pretty strong. But that made me laugh then, actually. He was so like, obviously that person didn't know who I was. And it kind of makes me chuckle now. That's 13 years ago. And I still kind of remember that in the back of my mind. But it didn't bother me because I never paid too much attention to it. Other people can have whatever opinions they have. That's why I don't read stuff about me or don't watch myself. That's the reason for that. I don't need any negative energy in my life.
That's great. And thanks for those 2 stories. I'll tell you very quickly. I remember we had a 2-year, 20-plus game winning streak going, and we were at about the 46-yard line and decided to punt it away. And somebody in the crowd, oh, you're horrible. What a terrible, you bum, you blah, blah, blah. And I remember turning to my staff and I said, 20-plus wins doesn't get you quite what it used to get. And I said, they're going to find fault with anything. As you said, fans are fans and they're passionate. I get it. But sometimes it's like you said, they think they could do much better than you. And they don't realize the amount of work you put in to your craft, the 80-hour weeks and all the things that lead up to those moments and in the special times like you hit out in Montana when you went out there and came away with that amazing victory. I mean, some of the great moments. But thanks for letting us in there. I did want to get back on the world stage. You've always talked here on this show about the geopolitical situations. Now, quietly, North Korea has a nuclear expansion going on, the world's forgotten crisis. While everybody's watching the Strait of Hormuz, now Kim Jong-un is boasting about North Korea's rapid expansion. And you've always said this. And you've always kind of kept us on guard saying that geopolitically you're worried about maybe an outside force doing something untowardly. Your thoughts on this movement with North Korea?
I think the news with Kim Jong-un is not new, Jamie. It's been around a little while. And, he's also an egomaniac and he's also a narcissist. And he has no problems kind of bragging to the rest of the world about, what North Korea is doing. And he takes a lot of pride in the fact that they have a nuclear arsenal. We recognize that, he is not our friend. I have no doubt that our military and Homeland Security is well aware of that. And again, they're not our friend, but they're not the only ones with nuclear weapons. I'm sure China's got them. Russia certainly has them. Right now, we just want to make sure that Iran doesn't have them. But people do have serious weapons that could really cause a potential end to the world as we know it today. Right. I think hopefully they never get used. But, at some point, they exist for some reason. At some point, somebody's going to push a button. Yeah. And I hope it's not in our lifetime or our children's lifetime, but at some point it's probably going to happen. And we're just going to be able to handle it.
to that end, we saw Russian President Vladimir Putin sat down with Iran Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi this week, offering to mediate between Tehran and Washington. Mediate or assist, Coach? It really bothers you when you see another world power meeting with somebody that we're going up against, whereas, I don't know, so many possibilities. What were you thinking when you saw about this type of meeting?
Russia's not our a friend. Russia and Iran already have their own relationship. Right. So I doubt they were talking about the possibility of mediation. And right. I think from our perspective, anybody coming to mediate and kind of get it fixed, well, that'd be wonderful. But I don't see Russia necessarily doing that. I'm sure they were probably talking about to what extent might they be able to help each other, especially with regards to what's going on in the Strait, especially with what's going on in the price of oil. I'm sure that was more the discussion than it was right. about how they're going to help solve the Iranian crisis that we're in the middle of now.
You're watching the Joe Moglia Podcast, first quarter action here, covering world politics. News around the world. Germany has called out America, saying the U.S. is being humiliated. Coach, Germany leader Friedrich Merz came out this week and said the United States is being humiliated on the world stage by Iran, openly criticizing how Washington is handling the war at hand. Your thoughts, and when you heard this from a German leader?
I heard it, but I don't know exactly what the context was, and I don't know exactly what the meaning was behind that, other than the fact that, Germany is certainly a world leader, and they're certainly a major player in Europe. Right. And this is going on in Europe and the Middle East. It's much closer to their home than what it is to our home. And I think from the very beginning, a lot of the players in Europe were disappointed that Trump or our country didn't discuss this with them ahead of time. Now, if we did discuss it with them ahead of time, I'm not sure we would be able to keep that a secret. And I think us surprising Iran the way we did at the time was probably pretty effective for us. Yes. But I don't necessarily understand it, but I can appreciate the fact that they say, look, we're not like going after Canada, which is borderlines on right. your country. Right. We're not bothering Mexico, but you're kind of in the middle of our area here, and you never even talk to us about it. So I could see that they might be annoyed with us. And but again, so be it. Just like somebody doesn't like the call we make in a game, they don't like the call we make in a game. Right. The stakes are a lot higher here.
Well, I did want to ask you about the Iranian situation. The new Strait of Hormuz, of course, a proposal, deal or no deal. Marco Rubio is trying to get this done. Secretary of State called the, response from Iran better than expected. But Iran is saying basically, Coach, that they want to have the ability to run the Strait of Hormuz, and they're saying they want to push the nuclear can down the road, kick it down the road, and not talk about that as much now. I mean, it seems like they're asking for the world where they have very limited force to back it up, and they're trying to get the best deal possible. But the Strait of Hormuz right now, the new proposal says U.S. would open the Strait of Hormuz, but push nuclear talks later. Are we going to put up with this, or do we just say, hey, draw the line and say it's got to be this or nothing? Or I know negotiations with somebody that doesn't have what we have. What would you think is the right action here? If you were sitting at the table, what would you want?
I think the simple answer is that no, we have to address the nuclear weapons. That's why we're right. doing this to begin with. So
yes.
To put that aside doesn't necessarily make any sense to me. Now, having said that, it is possible that the president might look at this as they can't do anything with nuclear weapons right now, but if they have a chance to work with uranium and create more potential weapons of mass destruction down the road, it could be 5 to 10 years from now, well, maybe the president is open to declaring victory now, and we'll leave that for somebody else to handle down the road. He's already made an impression in terms of this is where we stand now. We've avoided at least near-term disaster. So maybe we can call it a win. We can go back to business as normal and move on, and somebody else can handle it. That's a possibility because he could call that a win. But that's not going to solve the problem. Solve the problem right now, you're there for nuclear reasons. I just assume we wrap that up and move on.
I agree 100%. Moving on to the economy, the U.S. government, coach, has collected 166 billion in tariffs that the Supreme Court ruled unconstitutional, and Customs is now building a system to refund that money to more than 330,000 businesses. Meanwhile, President Trump slapped a new 10% global baseline tariff under a different law the very same day, valid until July 24th. For the CEOs out there doing business and the business owners listening, what does this level of trade policy whiplash actually do to long-term planning and investment decisions from your perspective?
Yeah, I've got two thoughts. The first thought is it's difficult to plan when you don't know what's going on. But a lot of things we don't know. We don't know if the Fed's going to cut. We don't know what's ultimately going to happen. We could have a recession 2 years from now that's propped by something else altogether. I think AI is going to be very, very effective and productive, but maybe there's going to be collateral damage associated with that maybe we haven't anticipated yet. So there are plenty of things when you're responsible for a business or a program or an institution that you don't know necessarily what's going to happen down the road. So you can't plan 10 years from now, but you're planning, like to me, it was always like a rolling year or so.
Right.
So like 6 months from now, I'm still working on the rolling year. 3 months from now, I'm working on a rolling year. So I'm always working on what we need to do now and what we're trying to get done in the future. So we have to be prepared for the uneventful. That's why you can't be too aggressive, taking too much risk or leveraging yourself up too much, because if it blows up in your face, it could be disastrous. Go back to 2008, the financial crisis. Go back to March 2000 when the dot-com bubble burst. And there was just, so when things are overdone, the potential disaster waiting to be happy can be very, very significant. So you've got to be thoughtful as you plan for these things because nobody knows what the future is. So you have to take some of those things into consideration.
Goldman Sachs now projects that 67% of those tariff costs will directly fall to American consumers by July of 2026. Right around the corner, up from 37% last year, Coach. The sectors hit hardest, they say, will be groceries. That's going to kill us. Appliances, electronics, and pharmaceuticals. When you see those numbers, Coach, what's your honest advice to everyday Americans right now as they try to prepare to maintain households and survive this uncertainty?
We talked about this also in the past, Jamie, and I think that it's easy to say. First of all, I am sympathetic to those families that struggling with regards to this from a financial perspective. I certainly was one of those families for a good better half of my lifetime. But again, you go back. Somebody's still got to be accountable. You got to face reality. So if times are going to be hard, you can complain about them, or you can do something. You're not going to change them. So what can you do to make it better for your family? Well, maybe you don't go on the family vacation this year. Maybe you don't get a new car this year. Maybe when you do get a car, it's going to be a year from now. It's going to be a used one. Maybe you're used to going out for dinner once a week. Now you're not going to go out for dinner once a week. Maybe ideally you want to send your son or daughter to out-of-state university. Well, you can't afford the out-of-state tuition now. You're going to stay in-state. So there are things that you need to do to be able to tighten your belt in times of hardship. And you can complain about it if you want to, but if you don't do something about it, it's only going to be more difficult down the road. So when things are difficult, you kind of got to step it up a little bit. You got to tighten your belt. That's easy for somebody that's got some money to be able to say. But I would say that if I had no money, and that's the advice I would give to somebody that didn't have any money.
Okay. And Goldman Sachs, they have a new, of course, forecast about crude oil saying $90 a barrel by the end of 2026. I know it could happen. Do you expect that to happen? What does it mean for the American economy? And the price at the pump obviously going to go up if this is the case. But these forecasts, how much do you put into them and how much do you believe them versus your own take in terms of what you think in terms of the rise of the barrels of crude?
Well, I think they're valid based on a series of assumptions. So the assumptions could be wrong, but they're valid. I think that's fair. That's fair. Goldman Sachs has an excellent research department, but we're already at $90 a barrel. And I think if we stabilized here, it would be more expensive at the pump. Prices of cost of goods, anything that's got to be shipped, then the cost is going to go up. So that's the part where it's going to be inflationary, but it's not something that we can't handle. If it goes to $125 a barrel and it stays there for 2-3 months, that could lead to a global recession. That would be very, very serious. So we're already $90 a barrel. If we stabilize here and didn't get any worse, we would work our way through it. And then hopefully a year or two from now, we go back to normal. But we don't know where it's going to be, 6 months from now. So a lot's going to depend on what happens with the Strait of Hormuz and what happens with the Iranian crisis.
I do want to give you a lot of credit because you have been right at the forefront of the AI boom and talking about that every single week on the show. The S&P inches 500 inches to new record. People are wondering if it's real, given entirely the drive forward by AI optimism. Your thoughts on that, even despite the war, tariff, chaos, oil prices surging? It looks like AI is offsetting and helping of course, the rise in numbers. Your thoughts on this?
No, I think that's the way it looks as well. But you can't ignore the fact that we have a very serious geopolitical crisis.
Yes.
That's also energy related in the Middle East. That's very, very serious. Above and beyond that, we also have a Ukrainian war that nobody's talked about anymore. And we've got other.
Isn't it funny? Nobody does talk about, yeah.
Right. We've got issues going on around the world that, the geopolitical stress that we feel as a country today, that the world feels, is very, very real. So that is not going to help any of this. None of that is good. Now, if you take that away, are we in really good shape? I'd say absolutely we're in really good shape, but you can't take it away. That's a critical part of what's going on. So long term, I'm bullish. I'd feel a lot better if the Iranian crisis comes to an end. I'd feel a lot better if I really knew what was going to happen with the price of oil. And in general, I want to be, involved with the market. I want to be long equity, but I don't want to go all in because the risk of things going against us is very real. So, but nor am I shorting it, nor am I turning around saying I don't want to be involved at all. So we're involved with the markets, but we're not as aggressive as we would be, let's say, would have been a year ago.
Okay. Everybody knows you built TD Ameritrade and your team into one of the most trusted financial institutions in the country. You know retail investors, in my opinion, better than anybody. Given everything we're seeing, the volatility, the potentially compromised Fed, tariff uncertainty, for the average investor listening and watching tonight that says, you know what is Joe doing? What can I do on my end, maybe to help my family and my future? Where do I put my money? We've talked tech stocks, you've talked so many different aspects. What do you recommend now with so much uncertainty and sometimes you're not super aggressive during these times? What would you recommend to the average investor?
I think it was worth looking at your portfolio and seeing what stock, for example, what sectors within the marketplace are going to get hit the hardest. Well, energy is going to do pretty well. So oil and gas has done pretty well. But then those sectors like travel, leisure, airplanes, automobiles that use oil and gas, have taken a hit. I prefer not to have those that are that susceptible to the pricing of oil in my portfolio, and I prefer probably have some energy in my portfolio, so it's a little bit of a hedge against other things going on.
Sure.
Having said that, I think I would be, if I'm already invested, and I've done reasonably well, I think to trim and take some off the table is probably a good idea.
Okay.
If the market really got hit, I think to take some of the money, put it back into the market would wind up making sense. But I think discretion is the better part of valor here. I wouldn't be jumping in at the highs right now relative to where we are, because we are near around the highs. So I would tend to take profits in areas that have done reasonably well. And if the market did poorly, I would probably be opportunistic and try to get back in at lower prices. But you never panic. That's the worst thing you can do. You can't get emotional with regard to the markets, and you basically got to wait it out.
Okay, everybody, we are turning to the sports page on the Joe Moglia podcast, and something I want to get your opinion on. LeBron James and his son Bronny playing together in the playoffs. What a remarkable time for their family in the history of one of the great players in NBA history. The Lakers are up 3-1 in their series. His son's playing quite a bit. They had an alley-oop together the other day during a playoff game. It's got to be as special as it gets. Your thoughts when you see the older James and the younger James together on an NBA court playing in key moments of key games. I know it brings a smile to your face. Your thoughts about these two playing together?
I think everybody recognizes the playoffs. Everybody recognizes important. Everybody recognizes that a particular team is supposed to win. But to have that special type of bond and those memories, those moments with your son or your loved one, that's pretty special. Yeah. So I'm sure that everybody, even if you don't like his team, even if you're like him, right, appreciate the fact that that's a special moment between father and son. And all of us wish we have something along those lines, if it may not be in an NBA playoff game, right, but hopefully we have some of those memories that mean something to us over the span of our lifetime.
Absolutely. The NFL draft recently in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I mean, it was 500,000 people or more showed up. It was an absolute dynamic show for the folks in Pittsburgh. Fernando Mendoza from Indiana, the quarterback, Heisman Trophy winner, went to the Las Vegas Raiders. You know how they changed Oakland, Las Vegas. The situation with Mendoza, as far as your prospects on him as a player, what do you see, Coach, on tape? He's a winner. He went undefeated in the, of course, Big Ten. He wins the national championship, the Heisman Trophy. Do you expect him to have great success at the Raiders, or do you think it's going to be a long-term play, or do you see him impacting him pretty quickly out of the gate?
Well, I think the Raiders probably need a quarterback, so he's going to need to have impact out of the gate. But it will take a while for any quarterback to adjust and adapt to what's going on in the NFL, number one. Number two, but, I like everything that I've seen about the kid. I like his attitude. He's a hard worker. Everybody talks about the fact that he's certainly a tough kid. He's not afraid to get the first down on his own. Right. He seems to have really, really good decision-making process, really does understand the game. I like the way he throws the ball. I like the decisions that he makes. I like his leadership qualities. I like the fact that he can run and he's tough. So I would think all those things would be wonderful qualities for him, in the NFL. Barring an injury, my guess is that he'll have a great career.
And they have Kirk Cousins they just signed that can be the bridge quarterback to lead, so he doesn't have to come out and play right away as his first year. That'll give him an opportunity to get his feet wet slowly versus just throwing him to the wolves, which is, as you know, that's a very hard situation for a young quarterback.
Well, I think one of the conversations that I'm sure they've had with Cousins as well is that, part of your job is to bring this kid along.
Yeah.
Right. You have served your time. You're probably going to wind up in the Hall of Fame. You've had a great career. And now it's this kid's chance. Right. So you become very, very valuable if you can make this kid better or more effective than what he would be at that particular point in time in his career. And then if we need you, obviously you're there, you're ready to go. So the kid doesn't have to be ready to play right away, but they want him on the field, I'm sure, as soon as they can get him on the field.
All right. And as we turn the page to the BAM subject matter, of course, Coach's philosophy that has changed the lives. Coach, I wanted to go back in time, and you've talked about great stories in the past where you visited prisons and you've seen prisoners' lives change. Your players have visited with prisoners. You've had time you've taken away to help your athletes vote. You've had so many different impacts on them. Can you go back and pull out a couple stories on the history of the program and talk about a few of the most successful moments of BAM in its history and what they meant the most to you and why?
I think in the one you've already referenced, that's the idea that the two things we do that nobody in the country has done, or at least certainly when I was responsible for the program, one was we had no rules. We just had the leadership philosophy called BAM. Standing on 2 feet, take responsibility for yourself, treat others with dignity and respect, and you're going to live with the consequences of your actions. That's a standard that's not easy to live up to, but has been my single differentiator, competitive advantage over the span of my lifetime, personally, and of course, 2 different career paths. That was one thing. The second thing we did that nobody else did, we gave up 30 minutes of practice a week. Nobody gives up practice. Right. We did, because I think there were things going on in the world that I wanted my guys to understand. It had nothing to do with football. Might have a lot to do with BAM, but didn't have anything to do with football. So one of those things was, I think the biggest threat, I'm going back to 2016 now, where the biggest threat in the world, I think, was terrorism. We see that today. Right. And I wanted my guys to understand what that meant. My guys knew what ISIS stood for. I bet 99% of the college students at that time didn't know what it was. My guys did. And then if you recognize that that's a serious threat, how do we protect ourselves? Well, through the military. Well, there are guys same age as my guys that are putting their lives on the line in the Middle East. And, so why we can play college football? Yeah, a little piece of it, but so we can live in freedom. But with the freedom comes responsibility. You go right back to take accountability for yourself. So we can only pray then that our military and political leaders have the guts, also part of BAM, to make the decisions they believe are the right ones for our long-term security, regardless of whether or not they get promoted or get elected or get a bigger bonus or whatever it might be today. Well, what role do we have in that? Well, we live in a democracy. We've got the right to vote. And in 135 years of college football, in 2016, the only program in the history of college football whose entire football team voted for President of the United States was Coastal Carolina. And now, since then, starting 2020, the NCAA is recommending that they give the athletes, election day off so they can vote. I said the other teams that have done it now, but we're the first. And I'm really pretty confident if we had not been the first, this wouldn't be happening today. So I think just that by itself, think about all the things that it takes into consideration. The whole idea of terrorism, the whole idea of the military, the idea of democracy, the idea of responsibility, I did be able to vote. And when my job is on the line for whether or not we're going to win or lose, these things still really, really matter. And I think they're part of the things that differentiate our program from other programs. And I like to feel that most of the guys within our program take a tremendous amount of pride in that.
And I think that speaks to you because I've talked to players of yours, one that lives here in Florida that runs a catering service, and he told me about the impact you had, not only him as a player, but as a young man developing into the man he is today, and he credits you. And so I don't think you fully realize sometimes all of what you do. Bam Henderson told me all the things you meant that you meant to him and all the players I talked to. It's the same theme. So let me ask you this. When you look at not only the football impact, which is a big part of it, and there's so many coaches out there doing an amazing job, but there are some that just, they're predominantly caring about that W and that win versus, the wholehearted development of every single player. You put your money where your mouth was. And to me, when a mother and father hands their son off to you and looks you in the eyes and says, Coach, you're mentoring my son, you're helping my son, I'm giving my son to you, you take that seriously and you really put your money where your mouth is in terms of development of a young man. So when he leaves, he's not only a better football player, but a better man and an opportunity for a bright future. You really take that to heart. And that's been really one of the big measures of your success from my point of view, from talking to players that have worked and played for you.
Well, number one, I appreciate those comments, Jamie. Thank you for that. But I think part of what has always moved me or motivated me or made me feel good about different things we're doing is the impact that I've been able to have on other people. And so I've said this before, I'm not a crazy football fan. I don't know who's the first string quarterback someplace else or who the top picks are of the draft. I don't know that. I don't follow that. I know what my guys are doing. I love the intellectual aspect of the game. It's like real serious master's chess, but with 22 people moving at once with a lot at stake. I love that piece of it. I know I can pull together a program. I love the community aspect of it with regard to the university or a city or a franchise. But at the end of the day, it's also about helping a guy grow up. It's also helping a young man or a boy become a man. It's not a macho thing, but a real man. My daughters were raised on the same principle.
Right.
Real man, a real woman, a real leader stands on ultimately takes responsibility for themselves. So having been a teenage father myself and having grown up in a gang and having had, some challenges overspent in my own lifetime, for me to be able to have an impact on others is what makes me feel whole. That's what makes me feel good. Now, the reality is, if we didn't win, I would have been fired. I may not have had that type of impact on others. Right. If we weren't successful in the business world, well, we may not have had that type of impact on others. So the winning and the success in the business, it gives you some credibility.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I do think it's about the impact you've had on others.
All right. And what an impact it's been, folks. We are now closing out the Joe Moglia Podcast. Coach, a lot of ground tonight. We've talked about world events, financial events, sports events. What's on your mind? The world is in flux now. We've got so much going on. We've got a White House dinner shooting event. We've got war in Ukraine, as you mentioned, people forgetting about. We've got the Iran situation, the Strait of Hormuz. Everything's up and down and in and out. It's just topsy-turvy world right now. What is on your mind in terms of advice for folks looking for something positive as we head forward and moving forward? What do you have for us this week?
There's a lot of criticism, I think, within our country that we're as divided as we've ever been. Having said that, think about the way the people in Iran or the Middle East live, unless you're incredibly wealthy. Think about what's going on there right now. And then think about how fortunate we are as Americans. Our country's not perfect. Our situation is not perfect. But how fortunate we are as Americans to be able to live in our country. And I think that's something we should keep in perspective. So, be grateful for that. Don't be afraid to say a prayer for that. If there's somebody else who can help out, try to help somebody else out. But at the end of the day, this is not about woe is me. It's not about, the price of gas is too high. This is about, I think, being appreciative we happen to live in the country that we live in, and we have the freedoms that we do have. For better or for worse, we're in a lot better shape than 99% of the rest of the planet. And we should be grateful for that.
Absolutely. The greatest country in the world, and we're blessed to be here, and we're blessed to hear from Coach Joe Moglia. Folks, to learn about one of the world's greatest business leaders, not to mention many times over Hall of Fame football coach, simply go to Moglia.com. That's Moglia.com for interviews, highlights, articles, and the latest and greatest when it comes to head coach Joe Moglia. Coach, you have any Maria coming up? Maria Bartiromo, any big appearences coming up? CNBC?
I don't have anything scheduled right now. I don't, Jamie.
The book? Any update on the book or the movie?
The book is the book itself is done, and it looks like it's going to be probably going to hit the streets the beginning of the first quarter of 2027.
We cannot wait.
Looking forward to that being able to get done, and
we cannot wait for that. We're so excited, and the movie is going to happen. And we got a lot to cover, but we're so excited, folks. And do not miss it. Moglia.com. Go check it out, and for all of the latest and greatest news regarding Coach. Coach, once again, thank you for joining us. Have a great week ahead, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Jamie, and all the best to everybody.
You got it. And folks, don't forget for the latest and greatest. Head over to Moglia.com, and remember to never miss an episode of the Joe Moglia Podcast. Have a great week. We'll see you next time right here.
Thank you for joining us for another edition of the Joe Moglia Podcast. Reminding you to learn more about Joe by going to the sensational Joe Moglia website at Moglia.com. That's Moglia.com. That's Moglia.com. When you visit the website, you'll be able to learn more about Joe's schedule of appearances on CNBC as well as other speaking and television appearances. You can also read all of Joe's incredible articles featured in Forbes magazine. For Hall of Fame coach Joe Moglia, producer-director Rob Matea, and Joe Moglia podcast host Jamie King,